Hi, welcome back. Um, we're going to get into maybe the whole first part of Jude the Obscure, but I don't know. I never know how long this is going to last, how much I'll say about it. But I do want to bring your attention to the Q3 question because during this time, the AP test has just happened. This is in May. I'm in May right now. And so they just released the question. And the question, I'll pull it up here. I'm going to pull this page so you can see this is what it's going to look like on the test. And from what I understand, they're going to cut out a few of the multiple choice questions, which is really good because I don't know why they think that you should be able to read classic literature, 18th century literature, 16th century literature fast. It's not a quick read. And you shouldn't be judged by that. I have a difficult time myself taking the test because it's timed, and I want to take my time. So, anyways, that's a good thing. The thing I don't like that they're talking about doing, I guess maybe for the next year, is on all these questions like this one, sometimes they'll give you a quote or something to kind of springboard off of. This one says, in 2004, Magic Seeds, and he quotes, "It is wrong to have an ideal view of the world. That's where all the mischief starts. That's when everything starts unraveling." And I'm using this today just because I'm about to talk about that, an ideal. And really, idealism works really well with the Bildungsroman. It's the coming of age story. Okay, so definition of Bildungsroman: a novel dealing with the formative years. Formative is a good word for you to know because anytime you want to talk about a young person's life and experience, formative is how you want to describe it. Willie Cather said that everything that a writer has is usually formed within or in the psyche or whatever before the age of 15. So the people, the landscape, wherever you grew up, that kind of culture that stays with you, because that's when you're coming of age. That's when you're starting to figure it out, and it's very impressionable, at that time, which is also the best time to learn, because as you get older, it gets more difficult to try to pick up a language or anything like that. So, anyways, back to the question. After the quote, then you write about a piece of literature that holds, or a character who holds this ideal view of the world. Now think of Jude with Christminster. And the idealism, which we haven't gotten through the whole novel, so you would need to read the whole novel to be able to write a really good essay, not just some of it, or spark noting it. Doesn't work. Because you have to show also how that is the reveals the work as a whole. And remember, I told you in the other lectures that Thomas Hardy summed it up by just saying it's about a boy who couldn't go to Oxford. So there you have it. What I don't like about what they say they may do, what I hear, is they may take out the word of finding something. You see all these choices. Down here you have Catcher in the Rye, Great Gatsby. I did a course on the Great Gatsby. It would have been perfect for this. Great Expectations. But it tells you to pick something in literary merit. Now, if it were me, and I was grading these, and people who are grading them are probably more like me than, someone who likes choice novels, which I think is stupid. But anyways, if it was me, I would say this kid's doing King Lear, this kid's doing Jude the Obscure, and I would probably be a little more biased on your side if you picked a hard novel like that. Rather than, if I saw To Kill a Mockingbird, I love To Kill a Mockingbird, but I teach it to 9th graders, not seniors, not AP seniors. So I know what they're trying to do by taking that literary merit quote out of there, but sometimes they will say things that they don't really mean. What they really mean is, if you want an 8 or a 9, you need to pick up something with literary merit, but they don't want to hold anybody back. They just really have a yearning to write about Harry Potter, but I would not take you seriously at all if you did that. So that's just what I'm saying. People are snobs about literature, but there's a reason. One of the reasons is because, like, if I go to a book club and we're reading one of the contemporary latest books and it's just all plot, there's nothing for us to talk about. So if it has a really good story and the plot goes real well, and that's great. But when you get to this question, what are you going to say? Whereas you could use this question for Their Eyes Are Watching God, Catcher in the Rye, the Jude the Obscure would be brilliant. I know I had a student who read Jude the Obscure, and I know he used it and probably felt really good about it. So see, at this point, you're probably thinking this book is very boring. It gets interesting, I promise. It just takes a while, you know. Literature is like a wine. It gets better with age and time. And I know you're probably just a hair too young to like really appreciate it. Someday you will. I was reading something, it was an introduction Bill Moyers did in the Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell. And he was a professor. And one of the students said, I don't understand how you think we're going to be able to read all of this. You know, I have all these other classes, and this is what happens when you're an English major too, is they may assign a couple of novels every 2 weeks. And that's, other classes are doing that as well, so it can get really overwhelming. And Campbell started laughing and said, I'm surprised you even try it all. He said, you don't have to read it all now. You have the rest of your life. And that's really with literature, you know, you're going to read it and absorb it to a certain extent, but later on, when you pick it back up, it's been a completely different experience. And just think about, if no one else is reading these classics and you are, you're going to be a better communicator. And not to mention, a lot smarter. So, anyways, okay, enough of that. So, at this point, he sees Christminster. He finds this ladder, climbs up the ladder, kind of ascending to a heavenly realm, but the reality is he's up there with the roofers, with the workers, and they ask this lad, what are you doing up here? And he says, I just want to see Christminster. And I think it's significant that the weather is bad, it's foggy, and he can barely see it. And I think that's kind of symbolic of where he is as far as class distinction, where they are in the university. And he can only see it from a distance. He hasn't seen it close up. And this is where idealism comes from. The people who make decisions, like our legislators just did in Texas, about let's tie merit pay, teachers' pay, to standardized testing, then they'll teach those kids. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You know it's a complete waste of time if you live in Texas. That test is stupid. And besides that, the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is because of that standardized test is what's created people, administrators, to say, well, let's not waste time reading novels. Okay, so the state's saying, oh, we need to get more rigorous about education, so we'll stop reading books, is the result. You know, something's wrong. There's a discord. That's a good word for you to use. It's out of harmony. It's out of tune. But are they in the schools? Do they know what they're talking about? No. They're over here and way in the distance. And a lot of times when he kind of talks about in this coming chapter, the roofers are talking about like the professor types. And it's amusing to me to kind of see their perspective, because they're not necessarily wrong in a lot of what they say. And I think that Thomas Hardy is kind of having some fun with this. Remember, he didn't go to Oxford and Cambridge. He was very well educated, obviously. He wrote this. He was probably more educated, but he was also probably more self-educated and didn't have all the privileges that other people had. And you see that in this opening of where Jude is, where he wants to be, and what's going to get in the way of that. But at the same time, he's also romanticizing what it would be like at the university, what he thinks Christminster is like. When he finally does go there, he finds it's nothing that he thought of. It was just an idea. You don't really have the experience until, like in at the end of Their Eyes Are Watching God, she tells her friend Phoebe, "You got to go there to know there," and he hasn't gone there yet, but he's going to. So here's a couple of remarks that, before that, when they're talking about, he mentioned something about religion, and there's a lot in here that I'm going to point out about, I guess, more making fun of religion, and it's okay, we can handle it. But also think about the context of this time. The church was corrupt. And so he mentions here, before they get into a conversation, when he's talking about, perhaps if he prayed. Why does God answer some prayers and not others? It's another dark night of the soul question, right? So he says, people said that if you prayed, things sometimes came to you, even though they sometimes did not. He had read in a tract about a man who had begun to build a church and had no money to finish it, knelt down and prayed, and the money came in by the next post. Another man tried the same experiment, and the money did not come, but he found afterwards that the breeches he knelt in were made by a wicked Jew. Now, not only does this suggest anti-Semitic time and context, obviously even Thomas Hardy's time, but the justification of saying, why didn't that happen? It must have been God's will. Maybe because God was trying to teach you this. Maybe because this was going to happen. One of my favorite examples of this is Brideshead Revisited, and I forget who is having this conversation, but he says, well, what if a pope, the pope says it's going to rain and it doesn't rain? He's wrong, because it's supposed to be infallible, right? And the answer is, well, maybe it is raining, but we're just not spiritual enough to see it. Okay, so, and that's kind of an extreme case, but we do that too. When what we're doing is we're projecting. We're projecting our own feelings and thoughts onto a mysterious God, where we have no way of knowing with our own rational brains. No matter how bright we might think we are, we're limited. We have a very limited point of view of the way the world possibly works. So anyway, it's been romanticizing this place. It has this celestial light that looks like a heavenly Jerusalem. It's probably looking at, the different effects of the fog and so forth, but it's like incense. It's all these kind of religious descriptions. And it is just as he's romantically looking at it. He's not really clear. He doesn't, it's idealism. But now, so when, and also I guess as a Bildungsroman at this point, what I would have done with that essay is when you're talking about someone growing up, for instance, maybe we'll just use Scout and To Kill a Mockingbird because most everybody's read that. Scout has a very innocent view of the world, that, people are not cruel, and that you can trust people, and that they won't hurt you, or they won't go out of their way to do something bad. That's a relatively innocent, and hopefully if children were brought up in a good home with loving parents, they have that ideal view of the world. The tricky bit is when you start to go to school and kids start making fun of you for things that are just completely out of your control, the way you look, the way you dress. It becomes like a class distinction, you know? You notice that the popular kids usually have the most money, they have the best stuff. Really, sometimes even they may have a terrible personality, but it doesn't seem to matter, right? And you start to look at the world a little bit differently. And this is where Jude is as he's becoming a young man. He's starting to see, or he will see in the next few chapters, that life isn't what he thought it was going to be. But then maybe even the university in Christminster isn't what he thinks it's going to be. So when he asked one of the roofers about the university, he says, young man," he observed, "you have to get your head unscrewed on the other way before you can read what they read there," which is what we're doing. "Why?" asked the boy. "Oh, they never look at anything that folks like we understand." And so you start to see this class distinction of the way that the idealist, the university professors see things, and the way the common people see things. And the common people are probably the ones that are doing most of the things, right? So he continues, "There's all learning there, nothing but learning except religion, and that's learning too. For I can never understand it." So not making it understandable to the common man. That doesn't really happen until way after the Protestant Reformation. "'Tis a serious-minded place. Not but there's winches in the streets at night, and suppose the raised passants there like radishes in the bed. And though it do take, how many years, Bob? 5 years of turning. So a solemn preaching, and he's talking about a man with no corrupt passions. They'll do it if it can be done." So anyways, you can see it's just kind of a hard passage, but the important thing is to get the class distinction here, okay? And then the other one, I like this one too. "M lives on a lofty level. There's no gainsaying it, though I myself may not think much of 'em. As we hear in our bodies on the high ground, so they be in their minds. Noble minds, men enough, no doubt, some of 'em, able to earn hundreds by thinking out loud." That's the dream job for all of us. So, let's see, what else does he say? "Oh, when you hear the music, though, this tantalizing music, you may be religious or you may not, but you can't help striking your homely notes with the rest. And there's a street in the place, in the main street, and hath another like it in the world. I should think I know a little about Christminster." And they probably know because of the labor, the jobs that would take them there, which is what Jude is going to kind of figure out as a way out in the next few chapters. That's where he's going to be a stonemason, which specifically works on churches, which is something that Thomas Hardy did as well, right? So, okay, so that's kind of the whole point of that romantic view of Christminster, and the difference between what's actually there, what's going on in professors' minds. But when you get to college, you'll see that some professors have gone maybe off the deep end in some ways. Some people probably think I have, but I don't think so, because I've actually worked in public school for 9 years. But I know some professors that would just come up with some crazy analysis, and you want to say, like Freud, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, which is strange coming from Freud. He didn't make something else out of that. But anyways, all right, so speaking of coming of age, disappointments. People disappoint you. So the next thing he knows, he's got to get these grammar books. But he ends up with a kind of shady physician, kind of like a witch doctor during this time, will come up with some things. And you think about it, how easy somebody like this could come into a poor community and just take advantage of people. And he takes advantage of Jude. He has him go out and get these orders, and in exchange he's supposed to give him his grammar books that he doesn't use anymore, and he forgets. And so Jude is about to get the piano back to Phillotson, and so he leaves him a note, and it takes a little while, but he eventually gets the grammar books, and they're very old. But here's the problem. If you just got grammar books with no explanation of how to use them on learning Greek and Latin, I mean, think of how many tools we have now. I'm talking to you through video courses. I'd be explaining it and telling you, you know, teaching you full sentences. He's got one word at a time. So there too, and I'll stop with this one, but for this lecture, but there too you see the distinction, and when people debate about equal opportunity. And the tendency is to think, well, everyone has equal opportunity. Of course, this isn't the American dream, but it's true in America too, I think. That, okay, if you had a private tutor who worked with you, you would be able to learn probably Greek and Latin faster than someone who's basically looking at a dictionary, right? So there is, you know, a distinction of and then also I think it's interesting in the next chapter how he's doing everything he can to work, and so he's trying to read while he's driving. Now, this isn't a car, but people still complain because they think he's mixing, not because they really think he's going to be a danger to himself, but because he's mixing work and what they consider play, you know, as if reading this these languages and trying to learn a new language is just for fun, for play. And it's obviously not, but they don't understand. Anyways, I'll leave with that because I know this is kind of long. I'll see you next time. Thanks.